So tonight we have a special guest, Lenny Esposito from Come Reason Ministries. He started Come Reason Ministries back in 1996, so he's been doing this for some time. And we try to get Lenny back here at least once a year. Really enjoy having him. Tonight he's going to talk on a topic about talking faith without fighting. And of course you all know that we live in a very sort of a toxic age where the Bible is really frowned upon and viewed as dangerous in our day and age. It's hard to believe when you first become a Christian because God's so good to you and you feel like, wow, this is wonderful, and you do want to share it. And then you start that conversation at the dinner table that kind of blows up. We've all sort of been there where you start to share your faith and it escalates into a shouting contest, sort of. And so keeping that in mind, that we are sent into the world and we are to be equipped to be ministers of grace and to have a certain amount of knowledge at our disposal to be able to communicate to people who have genuine questions about reality, people who may know nothing about God. And you might be that person sent by God directly to that person to share the gospel with them. So Lenny's going to talk tonight about this particular topic. What we're going to do is have a Q&A time if there's some time at the end of his talk. I think we're going to set up a microphone in one of these aisles, probably over here. So you'll have an opportunity at the end, if time allows, to come up, ask a question. Lenny kind of makes his living answering questions. So what I would say is at that point, feel free to ask any question that comes to mind. That's what he's here for. So with that, I'll introduce you Lenny Esposito. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Keith. Thank you. I'm so glad to be here again. Always a joy to come down to Calvary Chapel, San Diego. I'm not too far away, just a couple hours north by car. But it's always great to be here with you fine people. Yes, we're going to talk about our topic here, talking about faith without fighting. And we will be starting in 2 Timothy chapter 2, if you want to turn there. Also, before you do, just in case you want to know, I'm going to put on the screen here. Do you guys have my screen? Okay, there it is. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to put on the screen here some contact information. If you want to find out more about the ministry, follow me. I write a daily blog on apologetics topics or issues of ethics, reason, stuff like that you can find at comereason.org. Also, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Pinterest and anything else you want to think about. Usually follow it up by Come Reason and you'll find me. So we have a table in the back with stuff. The Apologetic Study Bible for Students, I contributed some articles to that, and another book that I wrote a chapter for, as well as some topics on various issues that I've been teaching over the years, and you can go in the back afterwards. Look at that, or also sign up for our email newsletter, and I'll keep you abreast of everything else that's going on, which is, a lot. But along with the commercials, let's move on. Because I'm kind of a nerd, I like to look in used bookstores. Matter of fact, when we go on vacation, many times I will go through used bookstores, and my wife does not think that this is the place that we should stop and spend some of our vacation time when we're visiting a new city. But that's kind of how I like to roll. I was in a used bookstore and I found this interesting tome. Now, I figure the reason why this was in a used bookstore is because we now have Facebook and we don't need to learn how to start a fight. It's easy, right? Have we all been there? Okay, so you've all had a post on Facebook that either someone took wrong or maybe they didn't take it wrong. They just maybe didn't like the tone or didn't like the idea that it was religious in some sense. And they said something, and then you said something back, and all of a sudden it devolved into a fight. Well, that's why we want to learn how to effectively speak without fighting. But this book was really interesting because the author wrote it, and I'm pretty sure he wrote it from experience. He had some great tips. He said, "My wife sat down on the couch next to me as I was flipping channels. She asked, 'What's on TV?' I said, 'Dust.' And that's when the fight started. My wife was hinting about what she wanted for our upcoming anniversary. She said, 'I want something that goes from 0 to 150 in about 3 seconds.' So I bought her a scale. He goes on to say, 'When I got home last night, my wife demanded that I take her someplace expensive, so I took her to a gas station.'" But don't feel too bad, because he let her have a portion of the book. See, and she wrote that my wife and I were sitting at a table in my high school reunion, and I kept staring at a drunken lady, swigging her drink as she sat alone at a nearby table. And my wife asked, "Well, do you know her?" He goes, "Yeah," I said, "She's one of my old girlfriends. I understand she took to drinking right after we split up all those years ago. I hear she hasn't been the same since." And my wife said, "Goodness, who would think that a person could go on celebrating that long?" So it works both ways, as you can imagine. How do we communicate without fighting? How do we take contentious issues and try to make it work, especially with, right, what's the rule? You never talk about politics or religion, right? Well, you know, any Thanksgiving dinner, those kinds of issues are going to come up. So what do we do? And that's what I'm hoping to talk about tonight. We'll start with 2 Timothy. And Timothy here, I'm going to start in verse 14 through 16, and then I'm going to jump down. So Timothy writes, "Remind them of these things." Let me pull up my Timothy. This is Joseph, by the way. Joseph is running from Potiphar's wife. And 2 Timothy is the classic verse because you know it when he talks about fleeing youthful lusts. So Paul is instructing Timothy, and he says, "Remind them of these things and solemnly charge them in the presence of God not to wrangle about words, which is useless and leads to the ruin of the hearers, but be diligent to present yourselves approved to God as a workman who does not need to be ashamed, accurately handling the word of truth, but avoid worldly and empty chatter, for it will lead to further ungodliness." So this is our first command, that we need to engage ourselves in an appropriate way. And in verse 22, Paul clarifies. He says, "Now flee from youthful lusts and pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. But refuse foolish and ignorant speculations, knowing that they produce quarrels." You see the pattern here. Empty chatter is godlessness. Foolish speculations, they produce quarrels. "The Lord's bondservant must not be quarrelsome, but be kind to all, able to teach, patient when wrong, with gentleness correcting those who are in opposition, if perhaps God may grant them repentance leading to the knowledge of the truth, and they may come to their senses and escape from the snare of the devil, having been held captive by him to do his will." This is pretty strong language, I think, from Paul that he's giving to Timothy to say that we really need to approach our interaction with non-believers in a way that avoids the things that will trip them up. And unfortunately, in our day and age where contention is high and religion is so polarized, it's hard to do that. You may not even be looking for a fight. You may just be posting something because it blessed your heart, a verse or something like that. And then somebody comes along, and this has happened to me, and says something like, "How can you believe all of that fairy tale nonsense?" Right? Has this ever happened to anybody? How can you hold to that stuff? Yeah, but that's still not an excuse for us to not take Paul's command seriously and to seek to avoid quarrels and to try to teach and draw them away, because as he recognizes in this passage, they have been ensnared for the devil. Now, fleeing youthful lusts. We've heard this verse before. Most of the time when we hear it in a context talking about physical lusts. In our society today, lust tends to be the thing that we think about in terms of a sexual nature. But that isn't the only type of lust that Paul has in mind. If you look at the context of this passage, what is he talking about? He's talking about interpersonal relationships. And for the Christian, there tends to be two kinds of temptations that can take someone when dealing with this issue. The first kind of youthful lust would be the desire for superiority. We want to win. Go ahead, give me your best shot. I'm going to crush this guy the next time I comment back to him, right? Have you ever seen people who want to do this? They want to put another notch on their Bible belt and, leave them in ruins and walk away. That's not good. See, we're not trying to crush people. We're not even trying to win the argument when we engage people. We are trying to present the truth of the gospel to them. And that's a big difference. Your motivation matters. Realize arguments and useless quarrels, Paul says, breed the very things that are in opposition to the gospel. So what's your goal? Is it to win the argument or is it to win the soul? 1 Timothy 6, verses 4 through 6, Paul instructs Timothy in saying, teach and preach these principles. If anyone advocates a different doctrine and does not agree with sound words, those of our Lord Jesus Christ, and with the doctrine of conforming to godliness, he is conceited and understands nothing. But he has a morbid interest in controversial questions and disputes about words. And again, he says, out of which arise envy, strife, abusive language, evil suspicions, and constant friction between men of depraved mind and deprived of the truth. Men of depraved minds are those who are deprived of the truth. It shouldn't be a surprise that when you're giving the truth to those who are captured by the enemy, they may resist it. It will be either uncomfortable for them because it calls them into account, or it will remind them of their subjugation, which nobody likes to feel. So don't take it personally initially. I know it's very difficult, but don't take it personally when these things happen. We don't want to fall into the trap of just trying to be superior. That being said, there's another youthful lust, and that's the desire for apathy. Both of these are very childish in their nature. This is why I call them youthful lusts. They're the way kids think. Oh yeah, I made a rubber, you said you're made of glue. My daddy's gonna pounce on you, right? That's the desire for superiority. The desire for apathy is, it's not even worth the fight, it's not even worth the bother, I'm never gonna talk about anything like this again because all it does is get into a big argument. Well, no, verse 15 says, be diligent to present yourself approved. Right? You are to go out there because you understand that the individual that you're talking with is lost. He is in a dying situation. It's not only life and death, it's eternity that we're talking about. So apathy isn't a good approach. It's anti-biblical. The whole passage that we read is actually a command for us to go out and engage the world. Of course, apologists, 1 Peter 3:15, right? Always be prepared to give an answer to those who ask for the hope that is within you, right? Yet with gentleness and reverence. That preparation piece, we're supposed to know. And by the way, that's a benefit of studying apologetics, of studying why you believe what you believe. Because the more you know the material, the less threatened you'll be. I have literally listened to some of the top atheist minds in the world, and I've heard their case. And let me tell you guys, the Christians have the advantage because their best arguments are terrible compared to the Christianity. Now, they may not think so, but a lie can never be compared to the truth. The more you know, the more you're exposed to it, the less fearful you're going to be, right? I mean, if you're not really sure of that piano piece that you've practiced and for your first recital, of course you get nervous. But if you've practiced and practiced and practiced it so that you can play it in your sleep, it makes it a lot less nerve-wracking to come out and perform it. Offer a more satisfying answer to another person when they ask an objection. And if you start offering a point that they haven't thought about, that gives you a different angle. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about when we start discussing it. I remember I was in front of a group of college students, and one person asked me, how can Christianity be true when you only have a select group of people who know about it? And this is kind of a common objection. And I said, well, wait a minute. Is there anything else that you think might be true when only a select group of people knew about it? Do you remember medieval bloodletting, for example? In the early antiquity, or late antiquity, I guess we would say, early medieval times, the common belief was that the body continued to produce blood, that blood was a fountain, that it continued to be produced and gushed out. And what would happen is you would get out of balance. You would have an animal humor and a rational humor. And if you got sick, it means you were producing too much of one kind and not enough of another. So they would cut open a vein and they would let out some blood. They didn't know that blood circulated. They really hadn't discovered that yet. But just because they didn't know that blood circulated didn't mean that the circulation of blood was untrue. See, it doesn't matter. Truth doesn't matter on how many people know about it. Truth matters about whether it corresponds to reality. And that's the difference. And they had to think about this for a while when I talked to them about it. So what I want to kind of do tonight is to, number one, give you some tools that you can put in your pocket when you engage in certain conversations or when the opportunity arises. And secondly, I'm going to encourage you to prepare yourselves so that you can neither be too superior in your approach, nor will you be apathetic or maybe apprehensive about engaging at all. And there's a lot of ways to do this. I mean, a lot of people think that the study of apologetics is about arguing, right? No, it's about apologizing. I'm married. I'm good at that. No, I'm kidding. As a matter of fact, what I want to do is I want to show you a middle way. Apologetics isn't about battling all the time. It's not about, direct sword fighting. That's one way to do it. I've done that in things like formal debates. I've debated Dr. Richard Carrier before on the existence of God, and, you give up your 20. So that's kind of a head-to-head kind of idea. Another way to do it is to just kind of slowly reveal Jesus, maybe through a long walk. I think that's powerful, but it's not always appropriate, especially if you don't know the individual very well or you don't have a lot of time. So I want to find a third way. And I started thinking about this. How do we relate to people in a way that gives us common ground and yet still gives us kind of strength? What's the best model that we can do? And I started thinking about this with other types of relationships. Now, I've been married some 31 years, I met my wife, I should say, 31 years ago, okay? And the way we really met was we had known a similar group of folks, and we'd go out dancing on Friday nights. And it was 31 years ago that I asked her to dance for the first time. And we didn't know each other very well before then, but it was after that first dance that we danced again. And then we danced a third time. And 4 years later, I was putting a ring on her finger because of that dance. Now we have 4 children, and I don't know what happened, but I want to use then the idea of finding our balance between not being too superior but not being too apathetic, and I think I want to use the idea of a dance. Now, how many of you have ever watched, say, any kind of a ballroom dance? Seen ballroom dancing, okay? Mostly, Dancing with the Stars has been popular, things like that. But ballroom dancing is interesting. I actually, for my wife's birthday, I bought a series of ballroom dance lessons. And there's certain things that you learn. First of all, both parties have to be kind of agreed to dance. It's pretty hard to dance when you're just kind of dragging the other guy around, That's not very romantic. They don't like it much. I don't know what that is. But no, you have to be agreed that you're going to dance. And if one's going to dance like the foxtrot and the other's going to dance the tango, it still won't work. So you want to have commonality in purpose, common purpose. And I think when we talk with individuals, we want to find a common purpose as well. Secondly, though, when you dance, especially in a formal ballroom setting, you need to have certain structure. You need to have a rigidity to your form, okay? You can't be all like limp noodle, you know? And I think this is important as well, because when we engage with those who are unbelievers, we don't want to be wet noodles ourselves. We don't want to just take it. We need to have a certain form and a certain structure. There has to be a certain pushback, a give and a receive that you exercise when you dance. You have to be strong. So you can't be dominant, you can't be apathetic, you can't be too weak, you can't be too strong. And you have to at least agree to go someplace. If the person doesn't want to talk at all, then there's no harm in saying, you know, okay, you don't want to talk. I mean, you can ask a second question. Hey, you know, you made a statement, can we follow this up? But if all they're going to do is shout insults, there's nothing that says that you have to be the doormat of Christianity in order to witness to someone. You can shut that down because it's not going to be effective. So I'm going to use the idea of the dance in order to show you how to seek the same end, how to get your structure and provide proper pushback, and how to not be either too dominant or too apathetic. And I think this will help us remember when we start engaging with others that there's a purpose, there's an end goal, and that is to reveal the gospel of Jesus Christ to them. Okay, so now we get to learn to dance. Everybody ready? You got your, ripped sweats and leg warmers on? Yeah, we're ready to go. Okay, number one, and this is a big one for Christians, we've got to slow down. We've got to slow down. I don't know how many times I talk with folks or I see folks trying to share the gospel, and they are, hi, how are you? So let me ask, do you believe in Jesus Christ to save you from your sins and lead you to everlasting life, or are you damned to hell forever and your soul's going to be burning for eternity? Would you like to accept him now? Right, let's go. It's like, the guy's like, what just happened? I walked into the store. What? All I wanted was a coffee here, and the guy in front of me is assaulting me, You can't move so fast in a dance that your partner can't keep up. You can only dance as fast as the slowest partner. In Christianity seems to be, at least in our modern mindset, we try to sell the thing. We try to get to the end of the pitch as quickly as possible. But are we actually taking a genuine interest in the other person when we do that? And I think that they can understand that all you're doing is, it's like a door-to-door salesman who's knocking on your door, and he doesn't care about you, he cares about the next sale. No, we want to take an interest in the individual. We need to slow down. We need to take a genuine interest in their lives, in what they do. Find out their name, find out why they're here. Ask, what do you do? Things like that. Sometimes we can go into Christianese. We can use these Christian terms. It's funny, I was reading a book by a gentleman who wrote about the way the ancient Romans saw the Christians. So this was all documents that he had researched from the Roman point of view. How did the Christians strike the contemporary culture in 200 AD or 100 AD? And one of the mistakes that they made early in the second century is the rumor started going around that the Christians were cannibals. Now, I think some of this was a smear tactic as I read it, but the other part was you can understand why that kind of assumption would be made. He who eats my body and drinks my blood. And some of the things that the Romans would do is they would capture these Christians, they would throw them in pits, and they'd pour lamb's blood over them as kind of a mockery of this kind of thing. But some people actually took this as real, that the Christians were cannibals. Why? It's because they didn't understand the language. So we may not want to start talking about saved by the blood, about, things like that we understand in the church. It's jargon. I worked in the technology field for many years, and it was interesting because we'd sit down with a client, we'd start talking to them about web development and the marketing company, the marketing department and the president would all say, I want this, and I want it to do this, and I want it to do that. And then generally I would have to turn at some point to the IT guy, and I would say something like, so do you think that we can run an XML interface in order to use SOAP in order for a data exchange or something like that? And I remember one time, one of the ladies looked at me at the table, she goes, oh, it's yo-yo time. And I went, I don't understand, what do you mean by that? She goes, well, when you guys start talking all that alphabet soup and technology, I think you should have yo-yos to pass out to the rest of us so that we have something to do while you're talking computerese, because we have no idea what you're talking about. That's not what we want to have happen when we're discussing with other people. We don't want to have Christianese kind of getting us in the way. So slow down, think about what you're going to say. Don't worry about getting to the end of your speech right away. It's, you don't have to move every person from A to Z. It's enough if you move a person from D to E. You've made progress. I take a group of students to Berkeley on an apologetics missions trip. We actually train students, and we'll take them to either Utah or Berkeley or Dearborn, Michigan, or one of these places. And we were at Berkeley just last month. And this girl had a wonderful story. First time she's ever done anything like this. And she met a gentleman from China who was an exchange student there. Now, the language was a little tough, but he spoke enough English to be understandable. And he had told her that, he was an atheist, which makes sense. China is predominantly atheist or Buddhist, which a lot of Buddhist beliefs are atheist in their own right anyway. But she started talking to him a little bit and using some of these techniques. And after half an hour, he goes, you know what? I think I believe in God. Now, did she get him to say the sinner's prayer? Well, no, she didn't. But that's a huge step to go from not believing in God to believing in God. Now that opens up the idea of the resurrection much more easily. Now, either she or somebody else can come in and introduce the concept of the resurrection to this gentleman, and it's not going to be nearly as foreign as to someone who doesn't believe in God at all. So we don't always have to go from A to Z. We can go from D to E, and that's okay. We need to slow down. Secondly, again, we need to listen to people. Listen to people. When you're talking to people, are you sitting there thinking about what you're going to say next as they're talking back to you? Or are you actually trying to hear what they have to say? Are you trying to learn more about who they are? In ballroom dancing, there is a reason why the women do all the jumps and the men provide the lifts. It's because any good ballroom dance coach will tell you the man is merely window dressing. It is the woman's show. It's like a wedding, right? The groom is there, and he's great, but he's like, okay, you're like one of the last things that she had to figure out. The rest of the wedding she's been planning since she was 5. She's been saving scraps of wedding dresses and picking out colors and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, there'll be a husband in there someplace, but let me tell you guys, if you ever make the wedding all about you, you're doing it wrong. I think that's in the book, actually. No. We do this a lot. We start to think about what we're going to say, what we want to engage in. So here's what I'm going to recommend for you. I'm going to recommend that you guys start to use what I call the second grade class photo approach. Anybody remember this? How many of you guys took a photo like this when you were a young kid? Maybe it's a soccer team or a camp. Yeah. When they passed out all 35 of these, what's the very first thing that you did? You looked for yourself, didn't you? Why? Because you are your own favorite subject. We love to check out ourselves. Our goal in sharing our faith is to not dump information onto the individual. Jesus never did this. When he talked to Nicodemus, he asked him questions. He engaged him in a conversation and tried to learn more about where Nicodemus was coming from. He expected a higher level of reasoning from Nicodemus and the Pharisees than he would with, say, the blind man in John chapter 9, right? Lord, who is he that I might know him? Jesus tells him plainly. He engages all of these people, the woman at the well, And John chapter 4 is another clear example where he engages people. And what does he do? He starts to ask questions. Matter of fact, you're going through the book of Acts right now. And you will soon be coming upon Acts 17, where Paul stands in front of a group of folks and says, "Men of Athens, I perceive you are very religious in all respects." He compliments them. He starts talking about them. And this is a key. This is a key that you want to do. So what you need to do is ask more questions, make fewer statements. You need to ask for the choreography. And what do I mean by that? Well, all worldviews need to make sense. And if you start asking, so I'll give you one quick example. I had a Jehovah's Witness lady come to my house. And she sat down. She wasn't there the first time I showed up. My son answered the door, and I had been out running errands. And he answered the door, and he saw that she was a Jehovah's Witness. And she said, can I talk to your parents? And he said, well, my dad's not home right now, but if you could come back maybe on Saturday, he'll be here. And he said that because Saturday was my birthday and he hadn't bought me anything yet. So he figured he could, give me a Jehovah's Witness. It's a true story. That's what he can. So she came back with her daughter. She came back on Saturday, and we sat down and we started talking. Okay, and we start, about Jesus and who do you think Jesus is? I ask her things like this, and of course she doesn't believe that Jesus is God, and I said okay, and I said, what do you do with John 1:1? Well, it's a God, things like that. Okay, and I said, let me ask you another question. What made you become a Jehovah's Witness? Were you always a Jehovah's Witness? And she goes, oh, no. I've been a Jehovah's Witness over maybe 5 to 6 years, I think. Well, what was it that, there's a lot of faiths out there. What attracted you to this specific faith? I'm really interested to know. And she said, well, let me tell you, I had a brother. And my brother, I loved my brother very much, my older brother. He was a really, great guy, just loved him. I was his little sister, but my brother also had some mental health issues. And because he had some mental health issues, he would do certain things that, well, let's just say they weren't very nice. They weren't very nice at all. In fact, they were so bad that they were kind of unmentionable. And as his mental health deteriorated, he actually became physically ill and he died fairly young. But I loved my brother. I knew he couldn't be in heaven because of all the terrible things that he's done. But I couldn't stand the thought of him being in hell. So I began a religious quest. And I looked through the different religions of the world. And I eventually found the Jehovah's Witnesses. And they teach the truth. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses don't teach hell. They teach an annihilation of the soul. So, if I had gone on the track of, you don't believe Jesus is God, and John 1:1 reads a God, and I start talking about Conwell's rule of Greek grammar, do you think that's going to make any headway with this woman? No. So I quickly started saying, well, what do you know about grace? What do you know about accountability? About, that Jesus can forgive even the most horrendous crimes? Do you see how that changed my conversation? Because I asked a couple of questions, because I wanted to really know what was her motivation in this. That's key. Everyone wants to see themselves in that old class picture. You want to establish a conversation. You want to start to build a rapport. You want to understand where these people are coming from. The best way to do so is have these folks talk about themselves. People will tell me they've had the greatest conversation in the world with me when they feel they've been heard instead of being talked at. So, we need to ask more questions. And when we ask more questions, we find this choreography. We find that there are ways we can talk to people. Now, the classic guy who would ask more questions and make fewer statements is this guy, Lieutenant Columbo. This was a long time ago, I know. I think you can still find it on some reruns someplace. Peter Falk played this bumbling detective on a television show, and he always had the same thing. He always showed up in this rumpled coat, and he always, looked like he was completely befuddled, had no idea what he was talking about. And he would usually come into the killer and he said, I'm really confused. Can you just clarify one thing for me? The person was strangled by a rope. Where did the rope come from in a closed room? Well, the rope was probably on the table over there. It's like, oh, well, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then he goes, okay, well, thank you. And then he walked away. One more thing. I just need to know, if the rope was on the table, then how could he have hung himself from that side of the room? And eventually what would happen is the individual would expose themselves because their lie would start to unravel. It wouldn't start to make sense. When you ask questions of people's beliefs, like, why do you believe that? Or what do you mean? Those are your two key questions. Why do you believe that? Or what do you mean? You will find, number one, you don't have to defend anything because you're not making any claims. You're asking them for a defense of their beliefs. So when somebody writes on your Facebook page, you should be for marriage equality. Well, what do you mean by marriage equality? I think that everybody has the right to get married. I do. But marriage means something very specific. It's a joining of man and woman for life. And everybody has that equal opportunity. So what do you mean by marriage? Well, I mean that anybody who loves anybody should be able to come together. Do you really believe that that's true? So 3 people who love each other should be able to come together? Am I understanding you correctly? You can start asking questions. There was a lady I was speaking with on a train. I used to ride a train back and forth to work. And she was an interesting lady. She had sat down on a seat and she was putting together like a bunch of yarn and a crocheting needle and some instructions, and she'd slap a label and she'd close the envelope and move on and do another one. And so I struck up oh, that's interesting. What are you doing? She goes, well, I'm putting together knitting kits or crocheting kits for hats. She's how to crochet a hat, and I sell these. Oh, that's pretty cool. Nice. Well, what's this label that you're putting on top of it? And she goes, well, it says, don't buy wool. Now, to me, this sounds strange, right? Because if you're into knitting and crocheting, wool to a knitter is like oils to a painter. It's the medium in which you work. So why would you say don't buy wool if you're into this? And I asked her, I said, what's that all about? She said, well, they torture sheep when they raise them for wool. They torture sheep? Yeah, they cut out their flesh and things like that. I said, I don't know anything about raising sheep. Oh, yeah, it's terrible. I said, well, I'd have to look into that, but they are sheep, so they're animals that we raise. Oh, whoa, well, you can't just say that they're sheep. I mean, sheep are precious. I know some animals that are just as valuable as any person that I've met. And I said, really? Now you've gotten into an area that I do know something about. Can I ask you a couple of questions? Okay. I said, well, I want you to imagine that you just got a new puppy dog as a beloved pet. Okay, so it's a young dog. You were scheduled to go on a cruise. This cruise happens to allow pets along, so you take the dog with you on the cruise. No problem there. And you're walking the dog to do its business on the side of the boat, and a huge wave comes and pitches the ship, and your dog tragically slides overboard. Now, at the same time your dog slides overboard, some stranger's 2-year-old daughter slides overboard. You jump in the water. Which one are you going to save first? Now, remember her claim that certain animals can be as valuable as people. Which one are you going to save first? I asked. And she looks and she says, oh, you're like those people I met in college, aren't you? I don't know. What kind of people did you meet in college? Were they dog lovers? I don't know. She goes, oh, I bet you voted for Bush in the last election. I didn't even bring up politics. And I told her, I said, what does that have to do with anything? I want to find out if you actually believe what you say you believe. Now, people are leaning in at this time. See, because everybody else is now interested to see how she's going to get out of this. And she's like, well, I'm a good person. I give to charities. I'm sure you do, ma'am. I want to know if you actually believe what you say you believe. And she said, okay, I got to leave. And she got up and walked away. Now, did I make any sort of claim whatsoever? No. I hadn't said that she's right, wrong, or indifferent. I said, I just want to find out if your statement plays out in all situations. Take the idea of, here's one. Oh, you Christians, all you do is talk about creation, you know. Why don't you believe in evolution? Evolution, why take this stuff on faith? Why not believe in science of evolution? Oh, you want to talk about evolution? Yeah. Well, before we do that, can you tell me exactly what kind of evolution you're talking about? He goes, well, what do you mean? So, well, there's a lot of different models of evolutionary theory out there. There's different ideas, so I can talk, intelligently to you. Can you tell me which type of evolution you mean? Well, just evolution. I said, no, it's not just evolution. I mean, even fundamentally, there's the idea of punctuated equilibria, which means things go in fits and starts, or there's gradual, evolving. And there were two different guys. There's Stephen Jay Gould battled with Richard Dawkins on this point. Those are two different big models. They're big differences. So which one do you mean? Well, I don't know. I mean just evolution. So where did you get this idea of evolution then? Well, I was taught about it in school. I learned it from my teacher. I said, oh, so you took it on faith. You haven't investigated this. You don't have any idea what you're talking about either, do you? So why do you want to throw it on me? So you see these problems that come in. If you start asking more questions and making fewer statements, you will find that their conclusions can sometimes be a little bit more disastrous. Now, this red car shouldn't tailgate. This is what we're trying to do here. You see, there's only two ways to change a belief. You can either add more information to the individual, something that they didn't know, or you can show them the contradiction within their current belief system. And that's why you want to ask more questions. Okay, next. Don't let them stomp on your feet. What do I mean by that? Well, in these kinds of engagements, a lot of people will bring up smoke screens, dodges, and red herrings, okay? What's a smoke screen, a dodge, or a red herring? They'll start talking about things that have absolutely nothing to do with the conversation that you want to have. Don't let them get away with this. Red herrings and smoke screens. Are you all familiar with what a red herring is? A red herring is called such because it used to be one of the ways they would work with dogs who were tracking dogs. So say a dog was tracking a fox. He would pick up the scent of the fox for the hunt, and he would follow the fox. And what some guys would do is they would, some of the trainer's assistants would take red herrings and they would run them perpendicular to the fox's path across the field. Now, if the dog was distracted by the smell of the herring, he would go off course and follow the smell of the herring. But you see, you're getting off course. You're not doing what you're supposed to be focused on. So that's what a red herring is. And many, many times we get into these issues where people will say something, you'll make a claim, and they'll say, how can an all good God allow evil in the world? And you have to say, are you telling me that every evil should be excised from the world? Yes, every evil should be excised from the world. Okay, how did you do on your taxes last year? Did you lie at all on those? How about when you were driving on the freeway? Did you break the law? Go a little fast? Aren't those violations? Aren't those evils? Well, maybe not every evil. So then you can agree that God can exist and still allow certain evils. Yeah, but your God, in the Bible, it says this contradiction. It's like, see, that's a red herring. Wait, I don't have to, I'm not done yet. I need you to agree that there can be at least some evil with God existing. Maybe God allows evil because he's merciful. He doesn't want to wipe out you because you stole an extra pen from the, office supply closet or something like that. So there's ways that we want to engage people, but don't let them take you off track. Don't let them dodge you. If people are honestly seeking an answer, they will be open to discussion. Otherwise, like I said, it's not worth your time. If they just want to just gainsay everything you've offered, no, okay, well, you know what? I can get just as much traction by talking to the wall. I'm not going to waste my time. I thought we were going in the same place. It's always a good idea to ask the question, can you tell me what evidence you would accept? Can you tell me what evidence you would accept to believe in God? I would have to be flaming letters across the moon. Really? And that's a pretty high level of accountability. What else in life do you look for that level of certainty? Nothing. Well, then why do you require it here? So ask what they would accept. Okay, next. Find their style. One of the biggest problems we have nowadays when talking with people is the idea of moral relativism. Everybody tries to relativize, I don't believe there's such a thing as absolute right and wrong. It's whatever society. I was talking with a woman at Berkeley, as a matter of fact, and this is what she said. And I said, really? There's no such thing as right and wrong? One of the follow-up questions I asked her, I said, can you tell me one problem that's plaguing all of humanity right now? What's the one pet peeve? What's the one problem that we all have to deal with? Believe me, everybody at Berkeley has an answer to that question. They all have an issue that they're passionate about. And this lady's happened to be pedophilia. She was really thought that pedophiles are. I said, so if there is no absolute right and wrong, does that mean the pedophiles could be right? Well, no, I guess maybe there's one absolute right and wrong. Yeah. When you start asking people questions, one of the things that you can find is you can find out what they're passionate about. When you start relativizing the things that those people are passionate about, all of a sudden they become absolutists. J.P. Moreland tells the story of going into the dorm room of another student. This is years ago when he was younger. And the person made the same claim that there's no such thing as right and wrong and things like that. He says, okay, fine. And he just walks over and he unplugs the kid's stereo, wraps it up, sticks it under his arm, starts to walk out. And the guy's like, what are you doing? So I'm taking your stereo. You can't do that. Oh yeah, I can, because see, I work out enough to where I can lift it, and I don't have a stereo. I'd like to have one. I think it would help me. It could help me in my studies, my audio books and things like that. So I think I think I'm entitled. No, but this is my stereo. So what, are you telling me that it's wrong for me to take your stereo? Oh, when it's yours, all of a sudden right and wrong start to show up. That's what you see. And that's one of the reasons, again, why you see why asking questions starts to become very, very important. You want to find the style. You can't dance the tango while somebody else is trying to dance the foxtrot. You got to find out what they care about and start following their beliefs to its own logical conclusion. And that brings us to the idea of knowing when to say when. Sometimes a change in direction can prove beneficial. One of the things that I do is, I'm sorry, I went too fast. One of the things that I do is I help out the Harvest Crusades by doing the chat counseling. They have online counseling during the entire crusade so that people are watching online can type in questions and things by computer. So I help them out with that. And a gentleman wrote in who was a PhD philosopher. Now, praise God that he brought me a philosopher, right? I know philosophy. I've studied philosophy. That's great. So we start talking, and I say, well, he goes, I really want to believe in God. I can't believe in God. It doesn't make any sense to me. I said, well, what doesn't make sense to you about it? Tell me. He goes, well, the problem of evil. I said, well, what's wrong with it? Well, how can you believe in a God? I said, and he quotes David Hume, basically. I said, well, that sounds very much like David Hume. He goes, wow, you know David Hume? I said, yeah, I know David Hume. And I start to talk to him about it. And the more I talk to him about it, and the more I give the textbook responses for his objections, I notice something. He's becoming stiffer and more distant and a little bit more curt in his answers. And the Holy Spirit right there told me something. The Holy Spirit said, you know what you're doing? You're telling a guy who's put 20 years of his life into philosophy that his last 20 years of life are a waste, and he's built himself on a belief system that holds no water. you're doing it wrong. So I completely changed course. And I said, wait a minute, you wrote in asking for help. Tell me why you wrote in. He said, because I really want to believe. And I said, I want to help you believe. You can believe. So we started talking about believing as opposed to the intellectual discussion or debate about the problem of evil. And it changed the whole conversation. Sometimes you can push too far and you start doing more damage than you're helping. You got to know when to say when. You can stop a conversation before you've converted the person, as I said. It's okay to do that. It's okay to come up for air. If you feel, by the way, that you're starting to get emotional yourself, that is the best time to stop a conversation. You don't want to get all red in the face, because then you've lost control and you're not, as Paul said, you're leading to strife and disbelief. So what you want to do is, if you start to feel your blood boiling, say, you know what? I love you too much to argue right now about this. You've made some good points. Let me think about them. Perhaps we can come back and talk again. That's the best way to do it, because now you're showing respect for them. I don't want to argue with you. I don't want to belittle you. I can feel that I'm not, quite ready to handle this conversation yet. Let me get my thoughts together and come back to you at a later time, things like that. That makes sense. Jesus did this all the time in his conversations. Paul spent 3 years in Ephesus. It's not like he just did it once and gave up. He was thinking long term. As Proverbs says, the wise in heart will be called understanding, and it's sweetness of speech that increases persuasiveness. So yelling, arguing, getting too worked up is not the way to go. And if they're getting too worked up, same thing is true, because no matter what you're saying, what they may be hearing is something different. Okay. So those are some of the steps we can take, right? We want to ask more questions. We want to take the second grade class photo approach. We don't want to let them step on our feet. We want to lead them to their logical conclusion. We want to find their style. But in order for us to be effective, as I said before, we have to put in the practice time. 1 Timothy 6:11. Paul writes, but flee from these things, you man of God, and pursue righteousness, godliness, faith, love, perseverance, and gentleness. Fight the good fight of faith. Take hold of the eternal life which you were called, and you made the good confessions in the presence of many witnesses. Notice these words right here. We are to pursue righteousness. We are to pursue godliness. We are to pursue faith, love. We are to pursue perseverance. It takes practice. It's something we're going to have to work at. Righteousness, integrity, virtue, purity of life, right? It's a state of someone as they ought to be. No, none of us are as we ought to be. None of us are wholly righteous. We pursue it. We have to pursue our perseverance. We have to not give up on giving up, right? We have to continue on. And we have to pursue our life intellectually as much as we pursue our life spiritually. Jesus says that we are to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. By the way, that word mind, that's not in the Deuteronomy passage that Jesus is quoting from. That he added in. So he must have thought it was pretty important. So how do we do this? How do we find these kinds of things? Well, we got to pick an issue. Okay? Find out something, first of all, that you're passionate about. You don't start dancing unless you like to dance. You don't start dancing one style if you like to dance another. So the easiest way to get in is to get in where you fit in. In other words, find out what moves and motivates you. Is it the abortion question? Okay, that's great. Is it same-sex marriage? Is it the loss of religious liberty? Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of issues today from which us as good Christians can pick. Find one that you care about. Start researching it. Start reading things on just that topic so you can understand it better. Read both those who are opposed to your position as well as those who are for it. And then maybe you write a letter to the editor in the newspaper. See, the letters, and this is where the internet is actually helpful, because you can, if you get worked up, you can stop, You can rest for 10 minutes and then rethink your quote. You can reread your... I recommend if you're ever posting on Facebook, by the way, don't post directly into the Facebook comment box. Write it in Microsoft Word so you can stop, you can read it, you can edit it, you can spell check it. Please spell check it. And then when it's the way you want it to say, copy and paste it into Facebook and hit the submit button. But letters to the editor are much the same thing. They're emails now. Write a letter to the local editor of your newspaper on an issue because you can put forth an argument and you don't have to come up with it immediately. You can look at your books. You can do things like that. And then when people respond back to you, guess what? Now you have more research work to do because you have to answer those questions. So you can get on the dance floor. There's nothing really to fear. False ideas, as I said, are weak. They don't hold up. Paul tells us that we are to fight the good fight of faith, right? We're to take hold of these things. This is the eternal life to which we're called. And we have our secret weapon. Our secret weapon is found in 2 Timothy 1:7. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And a sound mind. I'll give you one more story, and then I'll open it up for questions. Jehovah's Witness knocked on my door many years ago. And I walked out there, and hi, I'm with the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Bible. Would you be interested in that? Oh, yeah, I love that. I study that stuff. Oh, that's great. I said, I got a question for you. You know, you go door to door like this all the time? Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to applaud you for that, because people in my faith hardly ever do anything like that. And to have that dedication every Saturday morning when you could be like watching football or something, that's pretty impressive. He goes, well, thanks. I said, when you knock on these doors, I asked, you must hear a lot of reasons why people believe the things that they do. He goes, oh man, you wouldn't believe the things that I hear when I knock on people's doors. I said, yeah, I mean, like you ask them, why are you this faith? And well, I was, raised in it by my parents. He goes, yeah. Or, it works for me. It makes me feel better. Well, yeah, I've heard that too. Or, oh, well, I'm an American, so I have to. Oh, I've heard all of those and more. I said, yeah, that's great. I go, let's disagree that those are terrible reasons to believe something. There's really only one good reason to believe anything. He goes, well, what do you mean? I said, well, there's only one good reason to believe anything. That is if it's true. Sometimes we can hold beliefs that are nice, but if they're not true, they're worthless. Take Santa Claus, for instance. Right? We all love Santa Claus. Santa Claus is a great belief. Tell it to our kids. And let's face it, they've got a little bit of empirical evidence. They wake up in the morning, the cookies are gone, the milk's drunk, there's presents, right? They've got some scientific data here that they can work with. Okay, so if you're on a 5-hour flight to New York, do you want to be sitting next to a 37-year-old man who still believes in Santa Claus? Ooh, I don't want to be next to that guy. Why? What's that hurt? It's a nice belief. But it's not true. There's only one good reason to believe anything, is if it's true. Because yes, and that's why I'm a Jehovah's Witness. Okay, well, I've studied the Watchtower a little bit. And I don't want to talk about things like, blood transfusions or things like that. I think those are peripheral issues. The Jehovah's Witnesses have made many predictions on, say, like the coming of Christ. Oh, well, I know where you're going with this. Well, yeah, 1914, he was supposed to come back visibly, then in 1918, then 1925, then 1940, then 1975. Oh, yeah, but you got to understand that we're merely men and we make those mistakes. Those men made those mistakes, but men are fallible. And okay, I get that. As a matter of fact, I'll even give you that. That's fine. But the Jehovah's Witnesses have also claimed something else. They claim that Jesus isn't God, the second person of the Trinity, but that Jesus is Michael, the archangel. Goes, yeah. What if you find out that they're wrong about that too? Well, I don't think they're wrong about that. Well, wait. What if they are? What if they decide to change their views on that like they've changed their views on all these other things? Would you stop being a Jehovah's Witness? Would you? Well, I don't think so. But if they're wrong on that, would you give it up? If I could show you that the Jehovah's Witnesses are wrong on Jesus not being God, would you give up your belief in the Jehovah's Witnesses? He goes, well, the Jehovah's Witnesses I have to be a witness. It has provided the compass and the meaning for my life. And I said, wait a minute, didn't we just agree that that's a terrible reason to believe something? And he went, And you could see in his eyes, he's like, what did he do? What kind of word game did he play? You could just see it. He was turning, right? How did he do that? Well, he made some excuses and said, well, I'll come back again. And of course, he never came back. But you see the problem. See, we have nothing to fear. We can engage people, and if we ask the right questions and let them reveal themselves, you will find that people don't, number one, they really don't know much of the positions they take, and number two, they really haven't thought it through. So it's up to us to get out on the dance floor. God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. We need to exercise those. We need to go out. We need to work them like a muscle to learn our dance steps to make sure that we can compete when the time comes for us to do so. Let's pray.